Hello, film faithful, and happy Halloween. As today, here on the Movie Pope podcast, we are taking a look at two Hellboy movies, the 2004 version starring Ron Perlman and the 2019 version starring David Harbour from Stranger Things. And we're doing this review in the wake of the latest Hellboy movie, Hellboy the Crooked Man, having dropped a few weeks ago. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let us know down in the comments below what you think of these reviews and which movies or TV shows you'd like us to take a look at. And thank you so much for tuning in, and let's dive in. Lee, how are you doing today on this fine October afternoon?
Good. And it's actually October, so I guess that we stay true to form with that. So,
Yep.
but yeah, I would say, I kind of looking back at these films, so I saw both of them roughly around the times they came out. Kind of interesting going back to them. It didn't really, I think, strike much with me when I watched them the first time. And after watching both of them again, I kind of left at the same spot. So, I would say two things. I would say two movies that one of them I think is just okay. The other one I think is just kind of a little bit too over the top, but I guess we'll help talk about the two versions of Hellboy, right? So you got the 2004 and the 2019 versions. And I think something that's interesting that's worth kind of like, I guess, prefacing for this is the fact that the 2019 version, right, originally it was supposed to be a sequel to the second one, and you can help me. What was the name of the second one of the Hellboys? Like Golden Army or something.
The second one was the Golden Army, and I think and I think originally they were trying to get Ron Perlman to come back for a third one, but I think by that point he was kind of burnt out because he had done. Not only had he done those two Hellboy movies, but he also did two Hellboy animated films. So if I remember correctly from my research, by that point, I think it was like 2017 or 2018, he was like, "Yeah, I'm just packing it in. I'm not interested anymore." So that's why they, yeah. And so that's the reason why they turned to David Harbour for that.
All right, so kind of funny. So I guess we'll have to, I guess, verify which one of these stories is correct, because I actually, when I got it, it looked like the reason that Ron Perlman didn't want to do it was because Guillermo del Toro wouldn't be coming back for this version. And
I think that was another reason why. Because keep in mind,
okay, I got it. So it was a combination.
Yeah, because keep in mind, because the first Hellboy came out in 2004, the second one came out 4 years later. So when they were developing, doing a third one, it was probably like at least 9 or 10 years after that. So imagine by that point, Ron Perlman, being, having gotten a little bit older, he probably wasn't in the same shape as he was when he did the last Hellboy film.
Sure. Yeah.
No,
I totally get that. So,
but on an interesting note too, because as I said in the intro, we're doing this in light of Hellboy the Crooked Man, which is, what would you say, like the third or second attempt at a reboot, and this one here in particular, it was, they were quote unquote trying to go back to Hellboy's roots with this whole dark folk horror kind of thing. From what I've seen so far, it hasn't done too well in the box office. So far they had a budget of 20 mil and they've only reaped 1.3 million as a result. So
okay, that's worse than I thought.
Yeah, so and mind you, they got a different actor in the lead role. Yeah, we'll definitely revisit that question of who was the better Hellboy, and I would even add, another question: is there an actor who we think could probably do a much better job than Perlman or Harbour? Because both of these actors bring a unique characteristic to to the world's greatest paranormal investigator. But I kind of feel like one is more faithful to the comic book portrayal, and the other one kind of just riffs on it. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
But like,
And
but
I
like I said,
will,
we'll get into that in a little bit.
yeah.
I don't want to
Well, I
give
mean, yeah,
anything away.
yeah. I think, I mean, we're talking about Hellboy, right? I think one of the things when we're looking at which one we think is better, right? I think we definitely need to look at Hellboy and figure it out. And I think both of us would agree. I think both Ron Perlman and David Harbour are good actors, right? You would agree, like both of them, I think, do. Both of them are talented at what they're capable of doing, right? I'm not saying that they're, the world's greatest actors, but certainly I think they know how to do their stuff, right? You don't have any issues with either of the actors.
No, I don't question their ability as actors. I think they do pretty well. In their in their role. What I would say to that though is it very much depends on what the director and what the writer is looking
Absolutely.
for, right?
Yes.
So in a sense they're well, just like with any movie role, really, we can criticize the actor and say, well, you portrayed him this way, but you should have portrayed him that way, right? But we kind of lose sight of the fact that they're really at the mercy of the people who are in charge, right?
Absolutely.
So I mean, so I guess one example would be Ben Affleck's portrayal of Batman, right? Because we're so used to Batman being this sort of solitude figure who has a no kill rule, who doesn't use guns, and he'll break someone's bones and kneecap somebody, but he's never gonna kill anybody. And then here comes Ben Affleck, who is just he's basically a murderer in a bat costume, right? And we love giving him shit for that because he kind of has a totally different take of the Dark Knight, but we kind of lose sight of the fact that Zack Snyder, having full creative control, is basically telling Ben Affleck, "This is how I want you to play Batman."
Yes.
It's sort of that way. So
yeah.
And another thing I want to mention too is that as a superhero franchise, Hellboy occupies a very unique niche in that space because because in the film adaptations of, say, Marvel or DC, those are like the two big titans. Like whenever you see promos for a superhero movie, it's usually going to be one or the other. Dark Horse Entertainment, which is the studio which holds the rights to Hellboy, they're very small by comparison. So
Mhm.
so automatically you're when you're making these movies, you're catering to a unique a unique corner of the market. Anybody who's studied business or marketing will know, whenever you're developing a product and whenever you're pitching it, you got to know who your audience is. So so when they're releasing these announcements for the latest Hellboy movie, they know automatically, hey, we're really going after the people who are diehard Hellboy fans. Now, if you're a fan of superhero movies in general and you happen to like Hellboy, that's great. But these movies really aren't made for someone who's as someone who isn't as enthusiastic or as familiar with the Hellboy universe as they would be with Marvel or DC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say one of these movies definitely, I think, goes into the mindset that you have more of that background, while another one, I think, does a better job of helping bring you kind of slowly into the world. So I think
Yeah.
that's a great point there. So looking at, I think Hellboy, right, and just trying to, look this character. You mentioned that it all depends on what the director's vision is, and I would agree with that, because I think that for both of these guys, or both versions of Hellboy, I should say, they're both different, and it's a pretty noticeable difference too. Like, it's not just a slight thing.
It's night and day if you think about it. Like,
it's very different, right? So I think in the 2004 version, I kind of look at Ron Perlman, right, and he kind of plays it as like he's just like this angsty teenager, right? Like, he just, they kind of like talk about him being like, oh, he's just a kid. It's like he's, breaks out of his room, kind of like breaking curfew out, and he's got this, love interest that plays, I think, more of a story than you would really want to see it with Liz.
who by the way in the comics is just a coworker. She's not a romantic interest whatsoever.
Well,
So that,
okay. Well, it looks like they definitely wanted to go for something
yeah,
there.
yeah,
That wasn't in the I guess source material, so to say. Um, and he kind of gives off like he has this like kind of like bravado about him that he wants to be like the real tough guy, like he wants that to be his persona, and how he wants people to view him as this tough guy, but he's kind of got a little bit of a soft side, right? So it's just kind of how he gets portrayed. Um, and then for
he's more jovial. That's the thing because
I would agree, yes, yes, I
because
think that works in that universe a little bit better, at least in my
yeah,
opinion, right?
yeah.
And then you have David Harbour, right? Who in his portrayal, he kind of is just how would I put it? Like he just kind of at times he acts like an idiot and he talks like an idiot. And it was like very like weird for me to kind of see it. I didn't really enjoy his like mannerisms or how he kind of like represents the character. He did kind of have some whippy parts in there, and I think there's times where it's just like, okay, that was kind of humorous with how he delivered some of the lines, but I just didn't really enjoy that I guess that interpretation of the Hellboy character.
Did you
So
well, I was going to ask, did you get the sense that David Harbour portrayed him as as more of like the angry young man than Perlman, who's more of like the angsty teenager, like you said?
yeah, it definitely felt like he had seen a bunch of shit and he was already at the end of his rope. Whereas I think in the Perlman version, you kind of see his kind of fall into that more. Whereas he just kind of starts off like a really brooding character with David Harbour's Hellboy.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think if I had to choose one, right, because I think this is what a lot of this could be about. It's like, okay, who's the definitive one? I like Perlman's better, right? I think I
Yeah.
just liked his characterization more. And something that was really interesting to me was I actually liked the way he looked in the 2004 version instead of the 2019, which I find odd because I think technology and everything has really, made it easier to depict a character like Hellboy. But I don't know, the 2019 version, he just like, I don't know, his hair was always really oily and he just like, I just didn't like it. There's everything from like how he kind of interacted to his looks, I wasn't a fan of. So for
Yeah.
you, which was the definitive Hellboy if you had to choose between the two?
I mean,
Um,
I would say that Perlman, as someone who's familiar with the source material, I would say Perlman, does a much better job because he kind of captures this sort of gruff but good nature side of the character, and in a way, I kind of feel sorry for David Harbour because he only had the one crack at the character, whereas Perlman, he had four cracks at it because like I said earlier, he did Hellboy, he did the Golden Army, and then he did the two animated films. So he had a chance to, he had more of a chance to kind of take the character and kind of go in whatever direction was needed.
mhm.
So there's a bit of more of a familiarity, and and I will say this too, just to go back to my Batman example. I mean, I mean with Perlman's portrayal, you sort of get the feeling that he can kind of balance both sides of Hellboy's nature because Hellboy, is a cambion, which is a technical term for someone who is an offspring of a demon and a human witch, right?
Learn
So
something new every day.
so but you know what I mean because you can sort of see his demonic nature, flare up from time to time, but he also has that human nature which comes out, right? Whereas with Harbour, it's kind of like I kind of get the feeling like you could just snap at any moment, like he's just pissed off all the time, and you kind of feel like if you say the wrong things or if you look at him the wrong way, he could kind of snap your neck, and he wouldn't feel too bad about it either. Um, so so for me, I feel like Perlman kind of best captures the the spirit of what Hellboy of who Hellboy is and is faithful to the comics, whereas Harbour, as great of an actor as he is, I felt like he kind of took the character in a whole new direction, and to almost to the point where you kind of have to ask, is that really Hellboy, or is it just a character who happens to look like Hellboy? You know what I mean? It's like
Mm,
portraying Batman, but you kind of have to wonder sometimes, is that really Batman? Because the Batman I know doesn't go around using guns and
yeah.
murdering people with his
Mhm.
airship or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. So I think we're in agreement, right? I think that Perlman did a better job in the 2004 version of, I think, getting closer to the Hellboy character. Now, you obviously have a lot more information, like you clearly understand more about the Hellboy character than I do, but I think just overall, from being kind of a person that just simply, watches movies and enjoys stuff like that, I think no matter what Perlman's, I would say version I enjoyed more.
Let me ask you this then. So like I said earlier, Perlman had four cracks at the character, right? And Harbour only had the one crack at Hellboy. If had they done, let's say for instance, had they done a sequel, right, and had they done either like a mini series or 2 or 3 animated films, do you think Harbour could have done a much better job as the character, or do you think he kind of still would have come off as the angry young man like he did in the 2019 version?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I would say I think he probably would have kept the same type of character. I don't think that there would have been a whole lot of development with it, and I think that that would just unfortunately be rooted in kind of the type of character they wanted Hellboy to be in these remakes. So, because yeah, I think we're looking strictly at the original version in both. So even if we we talked about the Golden Army and the other animated films, Pullman had a lot of cracks at it. I think his first go was still better. And yeah, maybe David Harbour could have done more in future projects. But I think the fact that I didn't jive with the kind of original thought or the original iteration of the character. I just don't see that really getting better the further go along. I don't think that while Hellboy's obviously the central figure, his character I don't think goes through like a ton of development, right? So I just can't envision that really changing unless, like I said, the director wanted to go with the very different approach, if that was the case.
Yeah, and plus, you wouldn't have Guillermo del Toro kind of guiding the process because whatever your thoughts are on the guy, he is pretty consistent in what he
Yes.
wants his vision to be.
Mhm.
Whereas other directors, they kind of, it kind of varies from project to project.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I feel like had Harbour stayed on, I totally agree with you. I think it would have been the same thing because I don't think the director who did the 2019 version would have stayed on for any further projects. So I think to Harbour's point, I think he probably would have just remained the same character, just kind of make it easy for whoever the new director happens to be to kind of keep it consistent.
Yeah.
But I will not.
Mhm.
Well, I will say this. I think had Harbour had done, let's say for instance, if they did like a Hellboy mini series, for example, right? I kind of think we would have seen Harbour kind of develop a more of a humorous nature to the character.
Agreed. Yes.
But
yes.
but
there's
but,
room for improvement there. Yeah.
Right, but I don't think he would have taken it in the same way that Perlman did it because Perlman has a more dry, sarcastic wit. What we would sometimes call the English wit, right? Whereas Harbour, it's more of like the frat boy humor. It's like, and you see in the 2019 version where where a lot of the jokes that he makes is kind of like you could sort of see John Belushi making those similar kinds of jokes, right? Especially at the end where he's in the graveyard and he's just like getting totally shit faced and he's drinking in the graveyard. I'm like, okay, it's a little weird, but all right, I guess that's the humor they're going for. So I think we would have seen more of Harbour trying to add a more humorous element to the Hellboy character had he been allowed to portray him in other projects, but it probably would have followed the same vein as what we saw in the 2019
Agreed.
version.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, we do see sometimes where characters I think have a very drastic change in who they are. Main one I think about is like Thor, right? Like
Yes, yeah,
first
exactly.
two, and then the third one he just almost becomes like a joke or a caricature of what he is. Which is interesting because normally I would have a big issue with that, but I think Thor Ragnarok's probably one of my favorites. Definitely within the Thor verse. But yeah, I mean, it just is not, I would say, the norm, and you'd have to kind of go with it. And I think a lot of it too is just David Harbour's like delivery of lines too, I think is just very different for Perlman's, and I don't see that changing just because of I think that's the type of actor that David Harbour is. So I think that also plays into my mindset about how I think Hellboy would change from one iteration to the next, or like even if you get a different director, how he's going to be. I don't think it's going to be that much different.
To be fair, I mean, most of the time, whenever we've seen David Harbour in action, he really doesn't he really doesn't take on that many comedic roles or characters that kind of have this like, you know, unique or obvious, you know, sense of humor. You know, I mean, the biggest one is Stranger Things, where he's more of this protective figure, you know, authority figure who kind of is a man of action, right? Whereas Perlman, he's got more experience in doing the humorous stuff. The biggest one that comes to mind, you remember when Archer was on, he did the voice of Ramon Limon, that gay Cuban guy that Archer would have dealings with sometimes. Mm-hmm. I think Perlman did a phenomenal job in kind of balancing the humor in that character, and that kind of shows when he plays Hellboy. Whereas Harbour, you know, all he's known is just playing like these, like, you know, angsty authority figures who kind of have a chip on their shoulder, and they're trying to prove something. So that obviously comes out in his portrayal of Hellboy. I remember even when he hosted SNL, like he still kind of got this like edge to him that you're like, okay, maybe you ought to tone it down a little bit, man. Just
I mean, I will say at least, and like I said, I don't want to go through all of David Harbour's, filmography, I would say like in Black Widow, right? Because I know, Thunderbolts is coming up and everything, and I think he does. I did like his kind of characterization of Red Guardian, who I think kind of has a lot of kind of humorous delivery for stuff. So I think he is capable of doing it. I just think that, like I said, I think
he just doesn't get offered. He just doesn't often do these roles a lot. That's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think looking at it, it might be a hard comparison, but for sure.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's I get that.
Yeah. So I think Perlman, I think gets the leg up with this, right? I think he wears the horns the best, so to speak. So
yeah,
I think a good job for him. So with Hellboy, right? I think, and what I found very interesting between these two movies is like his team, right? The people that he works with make up a big part of the story. And I found it very interesting that in both of these versions, they're both very different how they deal with the cast. So I want to go ahead and we're going to kind of do a comparison here of the 2004 versus 2019 version and talk about these different characters, right? So, when we kind of get the team put together in the 2004, as in the 2019, obviously Professor Broom plays a big part in it, as does obviously Hellboy. But some of the other characters of the team are different, and I thought that was very interesting. And like I said, this is coming from someone that has zero background with Hellboy, so I just kind of rolled with it, right? So first you have in the 2004 version, right? You have Myers, right? I think John Myers or something.
Yeah.
And I kind of equated him. He's literally the audience surrogate, right? And I think that was a good choice for the film, and I did like that they did that, where for us as an audience, right, like he's kind of our I guess he's our eyes into this world, right?
He's the everyman.
Yeah, exactly. He's this generic character. I think they even make like a joke in there, like how generic his name is, and it makes sense, right? He's just for us to kind of be the vehicle for the story, and I think that was a good addition to it. And kind of makes, I think, the audience feel more involved. Then you have Abe Sapien, who is there. He's like, this fishman character that, he's just pretty much there for exposition, right? Like he's
the brainy character.
Yeah, he's like able to touch stuff and he can see things. Kind of interesting that Del Toro seems to have this obsession with fixed characters, because I think of The Way of Water. Mm-hmm. Where he had a very interesting portrayal of a fishman in that. But that's kind of Abe. And then the other character that was really interesting was Liz, who is, you mentioned her earlier that she's not a love interest in the comics per se, but in this she plays a very significant role in the relationship, because it definitely feels like she has a thing for Hellboy, and I think the feeling is mutual there. There is some like weird kind of like romantic melodrama stuff that happens, like with Myers and Liz versus Hellboy and Liz, which we'll wait to get to when we talk about the story. But I mean, she's a pretty, I think, powerful character. Like, when she actually uses her abilities, right, which seems that she doesn't have a very good control of. But like when she is able to get angry and use her firepower, she's very potent. So kind of makes sense for her to be a part of this team. And then on the 2019 version, they really have it kind of condensed down, right? So you have the character Alice, who's like a medium, so she could kind of, I think, kind of plays the ape sapien role a little bit. I don't want to make it a perfect one-to-one comparison because they have two different distinct powers, but I think overall, like, she helps kind of explain stuff and she helps kind of get the plot out to the audience. And then you have this character Ben, that's
the thing with Alice,
military guy.
Well, I was gonna say the thing with Alice, though. I mean, did you get the feeling like for the 2019 version, Alice was meant to be the everyman person in there?
You know what? I didn't see that. What makes you think that?
Well, here's my thing. It's because of the fact that Alice kind of starts off as like this person who just happens to know Hellboy, and then she's kind of taken on this journey with him, where she's like dropped into the world of the BPRD, and this is what they do, and it's almost like a fish out of water story, really, because she kind of gets dropped right into the middle of this huge event where they're trying to stop them away, and she's kind of having to figure out, hey, this is what the BPRD does, this is what Hellboy does, this is the role that Professor Broom plays, in the role. So so she's kind of trying to acclimate herself to these surroundings, and in a way you kind of understand where she's coming from, because you're especially if you're a layman who has no real connection or understanding of the Hellboy universe. I mean it would make perfect sense for you to kind of feel the same way. You're like, who are these people? I don't know what's going on here. I sort of know who Hellboy is, so I'm just going to follow him and just see like what's going on, and maybe if shit hits the fan, I'll decide if I want to stick around or if I'm, get the heck out of Dodge. That was my sense, but I kind of got the feeling, whereas Myers, he was really an outsider. He wasn't in the in crowd, right? He was just this regular FBI agent who gets assigned to to the BPRD, and he's learning the steps. Alice already has a no because Hellboy did rescue her from the fairies when she was a baby.
Yes.
So she's already got this familiarity with him. So so even then, if Alice is supposed to be into the universe, as it were, we still kind of get the feeling that she knows a little bit more than we do, especially for someone like you who has no background knowledge of the universe. You still kind of get the feeling, okay, I think I sort of understand what's going on here, but I feel like she's not really representing us too well, because she knows a little bit more about this than I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's where my mindset's coming from, and I think you perfectly articulated it for me. Was that I think that Myers, right? Like, he is just a regular old guy, right? He has no special abilities, other than, like I said, he's kind of thrust into this. So I think me as an audience, I attach more to his character just because of like who he is, right? Whereas I think Alice, she does have these powers, so it kind of makes me feel still like an outcast going into it.
Yeah, because she still has that connection with Hellboy because of what he did when she was a baby.
Correct. Yes. She got, stolen, and she's like, well, it's weird what happened with the fairies. So like, there's all that stuff going on. I think the other thing too is in the first one, like, Myers comes on the screen pretty quickly, right? I think it's within like the first 15 minutes where we kind of meet him. So after kind of the origin story, like we kind of get to meet Myers, and I think this is where we really start to get attached to the story. Whereas for me, in the Hellboy, the 2019 version, Alice doesn't show up until like almost 30, 35 minutes in. So we're almost like a third of the way through the film at that stage before she even shows up. So I think like for me, it just took too long for us to try to get that type of character to kind of present herself. And I think that kind of took me out a little bit more from it just because of how bizarre this universe is.
Well, it also has to do with the fact that the pacing is a lot more quicker in the 2019 version. So it's like, so there really isn't. So with the way that they're going, there really wasn't any way to kind of insert Alice at any point in time.
Correct. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. There's some good reasons that she appeared where she did. And I guess we could talk about that because I think we'll go ahead and talk about the villains next. But I think just looking at it, you're right. I think it's just kind of how it was, and that's how it is. So I guess if we're looking at the two, right? So I think if I had to choose, right, which one of these I enjoyed more, I would say I enjoyed the 2004 version. And here's kind of my reasoning, right? So one, what I didn't like about the 2004 was I didn't really enjoy how they portray Professor Broom. I think he felt like he was kind of detached from the whole thing. And, you know, I didn't feel his death as much as I did in the 2019 version. I guess spoilers, they both die in these films. So, you know, that was, I think, a knock against the first one, but I did just kind of enjoy a little bit more the camaraderie of the 2004 version. Because, you know, I think they all kind of brought something different. And as much as I didn't really care for, I think the relationship between like Liz and Hellboy, I think kind of just seeing all those characters come together was a little bit more meaningful. And I think the fact that they wanted Hellboy to have that relationship, I think kind of created a stronger bond of we want to see these people be successful because we know that there's, you know, this kind of like love angle going on that is going to be interesting for us.
I think that love angle kind of complicates the whole thing, though.
It does.
Right?
It does. It's a two-edged sword for sure, right? I think it has some positives and it also has some negatives because I think they really burned too much story time talking about it. But at least it kind of, to me, came back with how the team's composed. Was with the 2019 version, I just didn't really care too much for either of the characters. You know, Alice just kind of came across as a little bit annoying at times. I didn't really like her a whole lot. And then Ben was, I think, like he just really plays this like really one-dimensional, like strong military guy type of character. We do find out that he can turn into a jaguar, right? So I guess initially I was like, oh, he's a werewolf. And then no, it's not a werewolf. It's something close. So, you know, kind of something interesting there, but I don't know. I think they didn't spend enough time for us to get to know them. Like it was just too far into the movie before they introduced these other people for his team that I think detracted it. Whereas I think with Hellboy 2004, they introduced them earlier. We got to know them better. The 2019, I think it was just a little bit too rushed. They introduced them too late. And I think it kind of hurt how they developed the relationships throughout. So which one of you think they did a better job?
Well, let me ask you this. Like, what was your take on the team dynamics in both these movies? Because in my mind, there's more of a familial element in the 2004 version, whereas with the 2019, it was more of a, you know, well, you know, we're kind of stuck together, so let's just make the best of a bad situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think this goes back to how he's portrayed too, right? The Hellboy character, because I think for me, I do look at it like he genuinely cares about his team, right? Like even, you know, we talked about these. There was other like generic, I guess, red shirt type of characters that were in it, right? And you kind of got the feel that like, oh dang, he really cares for all these guys on the team. Like, you know, he's interested in their well-being, and I think that definitely goes out to both Abe and Liz and Myers, right? All these guys, like you could sense the fact that they all want to not have to worry about that. Whereas in the 2019, I do think he has a strong connection with Alice, and he makes it very clear. Ben just kind of feels like an afterthought, which is, you know, fine. I get that that's kind of the joke throughout it, right? Like,
but also keep in mind there was that one scene where Ben goes to that gunsmith to get that bullet that he was going to use on Hellboy
yes.
originally. So
yes, yes. Like there's definitely, it's very clear that there's not a whole lot of, I think, connection with them. And I think that kind of hurts the dynamic, right? I think it does improve throughout, which is obviously the point of it. But I don't think it really rises to what the 2004 version did. So even though I will say in the 2019, I really like the Professor Broom character a lot more. I think he had a lot more screen time, and I think that showed a lot more connection with him and Hellboy. So that was definitely much better done in the 2019 version, but I don't think that overpowers kind of everything that the 2004 version did. And like I said, I didn't think any of them did it exceptionally well, honestly, but I think the 2004 will win out for me.
So since we're on the discussion of teams, and in answer to your other question, I kind of like Abe and Liz team up, just because there's more of a familial element to them, but also because of the fact that you get this feeling that they're comfortable around each other. They kind of know each other's faults and foibles, and they're cool with it. But sticking out to the team discussion, because you mentioned it earlier, what did you think of Ian McShane's portrayal of Professor Broom as opposed to John Hurt's portrayal of Broom?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because they were very different, right? I think for John Hurt, right, like he definitely felt more of this.
He's more academic. He's more of an academic kind of guy.
Yes, like he's like it is very different how they portray those characters, because John Hurt, he felt like more of this like really relaxed father figure type of guy, right? Like he, kind of looked at the situation, he hid his disease from him. Like he, I think he felt more, I would say, detached from it. And I think that's kind of one of the things that the 2019 version did. Because for Ian McShane, like it definitely felt like he was more engaged with Hellboy, right? His son, so to say. So I think for Ian McShane's character, like he was more integral to the story, which I think kind of created a better dynamic between the two. And I think that's why, his demise at the end felt a lot more hurtful and more impactful, because I feel like for the 2004 version, he was very hands-off in the whole thing. We don't see a whole lot of the interaction. They felt very distant. And I think that kind of impacted it. But I definitely liked Ian McShane's portrayal a lot more, as far as the two Professor Broom.
Do you think? I mean, but do you think that the tense relationship between the two? Do you think that was warranted, or do you think that was integral to the whole story? Because I kind of felt like at times, it kind of got old. Where Hellboy kept saying, "Oh yeah, most dads buy their kids, bricks. My dad bought a gun."
It was petty, right? Like that definitely, it overstayed its welcome, absolutely. Because it is kind of boring to see that, because we don't really know a whole lot about their characters, right? Like we're really jumping into this. We don't see like what led to kind of all these disagreements. So I do agree with that, absolutely.
I mean, I will say this, Ian. I absolutely love Ian McShane. I think he's phenomenal as an actor. I just kind of get the feeling that that he brought too much of that gunslinger character, because didn't he do that's right, because he was in Deadwood. So like when he was like portraying him with like the big hat and the gun and everything, I'm like this is definitely a callback to Deadwood. Like like anybody who watches Deadwood, when they see Ian McShane in as Professor Broom, they're thinking, okay, it's basically his character from Deadwood, but with Hellboy.
Yeah,
that's all it was.
Yeah, I mean, he's very hands-on, right? I think one is like you pointed out. I think I feel like the 2004 version, it's the more like academic, the more reserved. Like I think he's the guy that kind of knows he's at his like kind of near his end, and like he's taking a very different approach to it. Whereas like for Ian McShane in the 2019 version, it's a lot more like he's there, he's in the trenches, like he's this kind of like capable person. I think it's just a very different depiction of the two. But yeah, I will give, like I said, a slight advantage there for the 2019. Just because I feel like they did a better job of like showing us everything. Yeah, so that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, same here.
So yeah, I think we both agree 2004 ultimately wins out for best team.
Yeah,
Even though we
yeah.
might like different aspects for it, but I think we both agree with for that. So I think the other thing we'll kind of go ahead and discuss is let's talk about the villain, right? Because I think I didn't quite put that down when I was thinking about all this, but I think it's really important to pull out from all this discussion is which one of the villains really work for us. And I think this is an interesting one, right? Because one of my main gripes in the 2004 version, right, is we have the character Rasputin, right? So this is, all connected to his origin, which I like, right? I like how the 2004, like, Rasputin kind of helped bring Hellboy into the world, and he plays a critical part in the story. So you have, like, Rasputin, there's the, like, guy with the gas mask, right? You can help me.
Yeah, Cronin. Yeah,
Cronin. Okay, of course you would know that. And then there's whatever, this dumb blonde chick that's in it.
Ilsa.
That,
Yeah,
and not even
she's
gonna,
a
yeah,
Nazi chick.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. Elsa from Indiana Jones, that works for me. So, so you
I mean,
have
they're both Nazis, so
I know they're both blonde Nazis, right? So they know what we're going for with that. So, I guess watch out all those Frozen, people that all like that because Elsa might be. So, but what I found very interesting, the 2004, right? You have this villain, but he really doesn't play a huge role in the story, right? At least not directly. Like indirectly, like yes, he kind of shows up at times, but I find it very interesting that he just doesn't really have a huge purpose to it.
it kind of
him,
make well, I was gonna say because it kind of makes you wonder who really is the villain
yeah,
because they kind of play it off and say, oh well, it's really Rasputin who's like pulling all the strings, but then you find out it's these Lovecraftian monsters
yes,
really who are controlling him, and you kind of see at
mm-hmm,
the end where one of them crawls out,
yeah,
and that's the thing that kind of pisses me off because it's like they keep playing. I mean, they're playing whack-a-mole basically with who the villain is because on the one hand, you think, oh, it's Samael because he keeps I mean, he's got more
yes,
screen time than Rasputin, but then you see
absolutely,
Rasputin kind of pop up here and there. But then you see flashes of these Lovecraft monsters floating around. So then you're like, are they like controlling the whole thing or what? Whereas with Nimue, she may be a one-dimensional character, but you at least know she's the one who's pulling all the strings and she's manipulating the whole thing, right?
yeah,
or
yeah,
or at least
absolutely,
Nimue is like villain numero uno, whereas here it's like with 2004 it's like, well, I guess it's Rasputin because we saw him at the beginning of the movie, but it could also be Ilsa because they fought the Nazis and she's a Nazi, or maybe it's Cronin because he's this guy who is a sadomasochist with sand in his body or for whatever reason,
yes,
maybe it's one of those monsters that we see, every now and then.
yes,
So that really drove me nuts because I was like, I really wish, I really wish they could have settled because the good thing about the Golden Army is that they at least figure out who the main villain should be
mm,
with the Elven Prince, whereas with the first one, it's like they don't know who it is, and you almost just want to scream at the screen, hey, pick in your lane and stay in it. Don't keep moving around, dude.
yeah, I agree because it just became very disorienting after a while because yeah, I mean Samael played a more I would say uh kind of played more of a story as far as the villains go just because it had the most screen time, right? I mean, it's just like this dumb monster and it had more screen time than any other quote unquote villains that are in it. So I think, when I'm looking at the two, you have kind of Hellboy 2004, right? You got, Rasputin and his like little gang of people, but they're not, huge into the story. It's really Samael that we see the most. And I think that's where I kind of got a little bit bummed out with that because we have all this, and then like we're seeing, to your point, like we got these like weird Cthulhu looking creatures out there. So it's like, okay, what's doing what? Who's going on? I also thought it was like so off-putting to me that like literally we see Rasputin get sucked into like that other universe or whatever, and then like literally the next scene he gets resurrected. So it's like all kind of over the place with how you want to show these characters. Whereas in the 2019, yeah, you have Nimue who is ultimately there, and she's kind of the overarching villain. The man bear pig, the pig demon, whatever the hell you want to call it. Um, it was just such a silly premise to have the villain want to do this. So pretty much the only reason that Nimue is getting resurrected is because the pig man got screwed out of being a human. So he's like, well, I don't like this Hellboy character. So the way I'm going to go about it is I'm going to bring this character back to life that pretty much is like, I kind of equated it to, it's like, imagine getting like picked on, and then you're like, well, I could like, escalate a little bit, but in this, I'm just going to bring like an atom bomb in, and I'm going to drop this in the form of Nimue, because it just felt so over the top for what it was. It was just like this kind of petty type of reason.
Yeah, it's
like
cutting off the nose to spite the face.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you. You're so wise with your words. So, but yeah, that's the part that always got to me, was like, you're like going after such a big character for something that's so really minor in the grand scheme of things. So,
and he ends up losing in the end either way. So it's,
he literally was just he pretty much was just screwed the whole time. So, but with that all being said, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Nimue, as much as I didn't really care for her at all, she at least was in the story the whole time. Like, we knew who she was, we knew what she was about. They dedicated a lot more story to her, and that's why I think I will give the advantage to the 2019. I think they did a better job with our villain character.
So for those of y'all keeping score at home, it's 2 for 2 between these two movies so far.
Wait, it was 2-1, right? So we got the best Hellboy, right? Is Ron
best actor for
Perlman.
Ron Perlman, and then we had Team, right?
Yeah, the Team, which is the 2004. Right now it's 2-1. 2-1.
Well, I was including Professor Broom also.
Oh, okay, that's fair. So yeah, sure. If we're just focusing on Broom, then yeah, I'd agree that Broom was that, if we want to count. So I don't know. It's 2-2. We're working on it, right? We'll come up with the conclusion at the end. Yeah. Even the scoring doesn't maybe reflect that. So, here's the thing about Nimue. It's the fact that the first 5 to 10 minutes of the movie, they kind of exposit on the fact that that here's this evil queen from Arthurian legend who wants to destroy the world of men. So Arthur uses Excalibur to decapitate her, and then basically, do what they did in Justice League, where they take, the mother boxes and scatter them throughout the earth. But somehow they kind of, make their way back, together and form the Unity thing, 1,500 years later, or however many years later. But so they're building her up as like this big villain, but when she actually goes about doing it, you kind of feel a bit cheated, because then you're like, oh yeah, that's it. Like I thought it was going to be a lot bigger than that. I mean, honestly, all the villains go down like little bitches, right? Let's be real here, right? None of them really pose much of a...
Well, the Pigman definitely goes down like a little bitch, but also I don't know. Let me ask you this. So we see Baba Yaga at least twice, right? One at the beginning where the Pigman confronts Baba Yaga, and she says, you need to go and reconnect Nimue. And then the second time where she's like, oh, if you want to stop Nimue, you got to go to Pendle Hill. And then in my mind, I'm like, so like, what's her goal really? Because the way I understand it is she really just wants an eyeball back.
I think she just wants to make out with Hellboy. That's the only thing I remember from Baba Yaga.
I mean, I guess he's the only one who can tolerate
eating children.
Yeah, that, and apparently she's very flexible, and she she and also she could use a bra too. I mean, seriously.
I mean that is Baba Yaga, right? Those things hang pretty deep. So, but I'm sorry. What were you asking about Baba Yaga? All I can remember for her is she just made out with Hellboy, and it was. I
mean, you really don't know what she's doing, because it sounds like she's playing both sides basically, because like she's helping Pigman at the beginning of the movie, but then by the middle of the movie she's like, oh, I'll go ahead and help you, Hellboy, if you give me one of your eyeballs and make out with me.
Which I mean, it's whatever king she's into is what I'm gonna go for with that. I don't put a whole lot into Baba Yaga's.
But I feel like she was an unnecessary character because
Oh,
she
for
really
sure, yes.
because to use your parlance, in the grand scheme of things, she really didn't play that big of a role.
Yes,
Really.
agreed. Yeah, totally agreed. So, yeah. So I guess point to the Hellboy 2019.
Yeah, for
The
villains.
villain, they
Yeah.
just I think did a better job, and that's not saying a whole lot, but at least they were better developed, I think, than what we got. So yeah, so 2-2, or however we want to keep count of that. Let's go ahead and we'll get to the last topic, which is I think just kind of a brief thing about the world and the story, right? So I'm not going to go as in depth as we normally go, which is very granular. But I think we could kind of talk a little bit about it. So I think when I'm thinking of the story, right, for the 2004, I'm always a sucker for that origin, right? And I think that for me, seeing the origin story, I think kind of perfectly gets you prepared for what you're about to witness. And I like how, you kind of got, the Nazis, like the whole scene is very muted, right? It's almost like black and white, right? It's not exactly like that, but all the colors are very much washed out of it. You kind of see all these, crazy things going on, this portal being created, this, Rasputin character, weird guy with a gas mask on. And then I like how like the Hellboy character eventually like comes out of the portal. And I like how he's, a very distinct red color, right? So it's, it's pretty much just like Schindler's List, right? This is Schindler's List when it comes down to it, with the red Hellboy as opposed to the girl in the red jacket. So, but I like how it like really kind of brings you into it, and I just like how the story kind of flows as you get to like meet the team. And I just like how it kind of started, but for me, where the 2004 film really suffered was there was just too much melodrama, right? And I think when you're plugging us into this very crazy world where you got these like demons and monsters, and you have this idea of the apocalypse, which both the movies are pretty much Hellboy's gonna bring apart the apocalypse. We're kind of expecting that, and then it turns into this kind of awkward teen drama. And I think that's where it really kind of sucked me out of it, because I was like this is not really what I want to see. As much as we talked about Liz and Hellboy's relationship and whatever was going on between Myers and Liz, this was where I wasn't a huge fan of it, because it just felt like a whole lot of bloated screen time for something that really wasn't there. I did like the fact that like when we see Samael, right? It looked really good, right? Like for practical effects, this looked really strong. I actually really liked the look of it, and it felt very like physical and real, which I really appreciated, because everything the 2019 felt very CGI. I like how the Samael villain monster thingy was kind of there. So I did kind of like that look for it, but it just felt like so much was like kind of going on, and then there was times where there was nothing going on, and that's where a lot of the movie lost to me. I didn't like the fact that gas mask guy, right, he gets quote unquote killed, right, and then you have like Professor Broom like sitting there like looking at him, and then he kind of resurrects himself, and I'm just like, ugh, like why would this be happening? Like you literally are dealing with a monster that resurrects itself. Why would you assume that this character that is killed, why would you assume that he's actually dead and not have any protocols in place? Like that just really bugged me. Like you can't have a character that revives himself and then just be like, okay, well, I guess this guy's full on dead, right? I mean, there can't be two people that resurrect themselves in this film. So that was really obnoxious to me. And they just kept throwing more and more weird stuff at you, right? Like you have like the part where Hellboy, like he resurrects those like that skeleton, right? When they're trying to find like Rasputin's lair. And it's just like, what are the rules in this world? Like, so he could just like have like an incantation that just is like reviving people from the dead. How does that work? I have no idea. They've never really explained it. And then we're getting to when they have this like fight, and you have Rasputin there, and then the weird Cthulhu baby comes out, and they're trying to open up all this stuff to the world, and a giant squid monster is the final villain of it, and it just all felt so disjointed. So with the 2004 version, I thought it started off well, then it got really slow, and then it tried to do too much. It got really just chaotic with the storytelling. So, but yeah, I don't know. What was your overall consensus for the 2004?
I mean, the pacing was very slow, but but to play devil's advocate here, no pun intended, they did it because they wanted to kind of ease the average layman into the world of Hellboy. So you kind of understood who he was, what the BPRD does, and through Agent Myers, you kind of figure out how things work here. I felt the whole romantic subplot was unnecessary because it didn't really add much to the story. Because if Hellboy, is portrayed as someone who cares about his colleagues and will do anything to protect them, there really is no need to add that romantic subplot because he still would have saved Liz either way. He didn't have to, you didn't have to make him like someone who's madly in love with her to kind of give him the extra push. You know what I mean?
Well, that's a great point. Excellent point.
But another thing too, just to go back to the villains thing, it really, really got out of hand when you started having all these different villainous characters pop in and out, and you can't, and you don't, and not to sound like a broken record, you can't really figure out what they're after because Samael is just there to wreak havoc because he's a mindless beast. And then you've got Rasputin, who I guess he sort of wants to bring about the end of the world, but I'm not really sure. But then you have the Cthulhu characters, where I imagine they're also mindless creatures, but I really don't know what they're after, apart from just entering our, reality. So it's like by the end, they kind of took everything and threw it to the wall and hoped something stuck.
Yeah.
Although I will say I really did enjoy the tone of the movie because the tone did have this like sort of like dark, this dark gothic vibe to it, which I really, really enjoyed. But the thing is like, you had the movie has got a 2 hour and 12-minute runtime, right? I feel like they could have trimmed a few minutes had they cut out a few scenes here and there. And honestly, I kind of find the whole Hellboy and Tom Manning, feud a bit odd. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because Manning pops up and then he's like, "Oh yeah, this Hellboy guy, I don't like him. I'm gonna go ahead and pick a fight with him and cheese and piss him off." And there's that one scene where they're in the infirmary and he's just saying all these things. I'm like, dude, you realize he could just squash you, right?
Yeah.
Like he literally has a red right hand made out of rock. I mean, he's not using it just to crush beer cans.
Yeah.
Like, should you really be like poking the bear in that kind of way? But even then, I feel like that whole relationship is kind of forced. It's like,
it's very much so,
because the relationship between him and Liz, like, I mean, I get it. They grew up together, so that they're already familiar with each other. You really didn't need to add that romantic subplot in order for them to be close, right? I felt like with Manning and Hellboy, it's like they work together. He's a superior. I mean, you already get the feeling that he's going to respect the chain of command. You don't need to make him a total dick to kind of add that drama, because in the end it doesn't really do anything. And by the end of the movie, where he saves Manning's life, it's like, well, he would have done that anyway. It's not like it's not like he had a sudden change of heart and decided, oh, I'm going to prove to you that I'm a good guy. Like, he's been consistent throughout the movie as a pretty decent person, right?
Yeah.
So overall, I felt
but they
like
do forget Manning at the end of the post credit. I will say,
they do.
The play, which it's kind of funny. I definitely forgot about him too. So I was not the only one that was like, oh yeah, wait a minute. They did kind of forget him in that whole thing.
but that's the thing. Like they were just they decided that okay, now you know what the Hellboy universe is like, and we're gonna start adding all these characters in. So
Mhm,
Manning is this guy, Cronin is this guy.
mhm.
Oh, by the way, there's also the Ogdru Jihad, who are these Lovecraft monsters. Oh, and let's not forget, we've got Abe Sapien, who is this fish man, and it kind of gets out of hand because if you're going to ease your audience into a franchise, I would imagine you would want to keep it as simple as possible. But
Mhm.
I guess like the first 30 minutes they kind of got it right, but then the last hour or so they're like, no, we're just going to go into overdrive. We're just going to like dump all
Yeah.
these characters, and you're sort of familiar with it now, so here are all these people, and try to keep up while you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Um, but I will say, in terms of practical effects, I really, really enjoyed what they did. The
Yeah.
Samael character, like I just thought the character design was brilliant.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. It looked really
Yeah,
good. It felt like I could absolutely reach out and touch it, and I would be worried about it. So,
yeah.
um,
Although,
for
although I
sure.
will, although I will say, by the end, especially in that fight where Hellboy is fighting that squid monster, you could obviously tell it was CGI. I mean, there was no way to
Yes.
cover that up. So
Yes.
it seemed like by that point they just decided, fuck it,
Yeah.
we're
There's
just
only
gonna
so much we
CGI
can
it.
do. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's only so
exactly,
much.
exactly. So by the time you get to the second half of the movie, it feels like it's a completely different movie from what you had in the first half.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot of push there. So,
Yeah.
whereas opposed to in the 2019 version, where I feel like just they thrust so much at you, that it's just like constantly like we're discovering new and new things, right? So, in the 2019 version, we kind of start with this kind of like backdrop of how Nimue the villain, right? So we kind of see everything that happened with her and how she was, betrayed by these other witches, and they cut her up and put her all these boxes and scatter her about because Arthur, used Excalibur, cut off her head. And that's kind of where it starts. And then it's like we jump right into kind of like the Hellboy world where Hellboy is there. He's, trying to find another agent, which I guess, kind of shows you the fact that he's, very caring of the people he works with. And he finds out that this guy, I forget what his last name was, Cruz or Ruiz, something like that.
Ruiz. Yeah, it was
Ruiz,
Ruiz.
thank
Yeah.
you. I knew I'd get it one of those two. So, he's now a going out to like a lucha libre fight, and finds out like he's a vampire. So I'm like, okay, so I guess there's vampires in this universe.
Yeah, he got
He gets
turned. Yeah.
killed. Yeah, so he gets killed. I'm like, okay, well, I guess that was, bound to happen. And then it just felt like we were always like jumping around to other things. So then we meet the pigman creature, right? Where, he's like trying to get all these like boxes to get Nimue back. And I thought that scene where like he goes to that like temple where all the monks are not talking, and he like I guess rips out the dude's tongue, and then he uses it to be able to like talk to like open up the chest. I just kind of went with that. I was just like, okay, I guess that works. Like, did he just like eat his tongue, and because of that, like he like knows how to like talk now, or does he like put his tongue like on top of the tongue, and because of that, like I don't know. I'm not trying to get into the logistics of or the legal matters for what it's constituting, like using the words of a holy person, but I thought that was really weird. And you kind of see like her getting built up, and then you have the Osiris Club, and I felt like that was just totally not needed. I didn't really understand the purpose of it. I know it's to kind of get things rolling, but it was kind of weird to me that you have the Osiris Club. They try to like they bring Hellboy in like under the guise of like they need help killing these giant ogres, and even Hellboy mentions like, that's weird, like you guys have been killing these giants for centuries, like why do you need my help? And then like eventually they are like, oh, actually we're bad, we're like we want to kill you because you're gonna bring about the apocalypse, and this is all ruse. And I'm like, yeah, we kind of knew that. Like even Hellboy knew that this was a ruse. So I don't understand why you even were a part of it. Like I guess it's to get some exposition going there, but
Well, the irony, the biggest irony is the fact they all get wiped up by the
yeah,
giants, and then you
exactly. Yeah,
and
and it
then
was
you
three
said,
giants too.
yeah,
Oddly enough.
And what's funny was that before they go on the hunt, like they enter that room where you see all the giant heads, and they're like, okay, so they're pretty experienced and they know how to handle giants, but then the whole party gets wiped out. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so was it just a particularly bad day, or was it more of like, or was it like they were just gaslighting? They just bought a bunch of giant heads from Party City and kind of stuck it on there to make it sound like they were, better than they
Yeah.
actually were. You know what I
Maybe it was
mean?
like an off day and the D team was out there and they just can't deal with it. So I
I
don't
just
know.
find you want to know what's funny is the fact that when they go hunting for giants, I mean, it's set in the 21st century, obviously, but they're dressed like
Yes.
like the cast from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I mean, even Hellboy makes fun of that, like what's going on with the look. So it's all there, and it's very much like on the nose. Like,
I mean, all they're missing are the coconuts, really.
yes, like it was just kind of like comical to see, and that's where like a lot of the story goes. Is just like the pig demon, and we already talked about him as a villain and kind of his very weak reason for wanting to resurrect Nimue just to get vengeance on Hellboy, for something that isn't that deep to me, but I guess it is what it is. He is trying to Hellboy's trying to help find Nimue through a good chunk of this. We run into Baba Yaga. They have a big makeout session. That's about all I'm going to say about Baba Yaga. She kind of points her in the general direction of where Nimue is. And then I like how when they're at the tree, right, that we see Nimue in the flashback, it's where she gets decapitated and gets, kind of cut up pretty much. I like how, like, there's this huge fight between Hellboy and Nimue, and Alice just starts running out, like, hey, what's going on? And I'm like, Alice, you're so stupid. Like, do you not have any self-preservation in your body? Like, you're just kind of like running out there into the middle of this fight. And she just kind of like shows up and she gets shot with the little poison dart leech thing, right? And I just like lost my shit. I'm like, this has got to be one of the dumbest character things I've seen in a while. It was just so blatant that she was going to get hit. And then just going with the story, it's like, okay, cool. Now we're going to go see Merlin. And now we're going to, tie everything back to Merlin and Arthur again. And Merlin's like, okay, cool, I'll take this off of her. So Merlin's able to do that. And then he brings up Excalibur and Hellboy touches the sword and he's like, oh, I'm not going to take it because, this is going to cause the apocalypse to happen. And Merlin gets really pissed with them. And then, they go to that cathedral, right?
Yeah, St. Paul's.
Yes, thank you. St. Paul's Cathedral. I knew you knew that. Of course you know that. So they go to that cathedral. And, you have that, like, brief thing with, like, Mayor Bear Pig, and, Nimue ends up, like, betraying him. But I like how the sword that we just saw with Merlin bringing it in, it's just there at the cathedral anyway. So why bring it up? It's like,
it was a huge waste of time right there.
Yeah, it's just like you bring up this huge deal. It's like you're going on a side quest in this and we don't need it, right? Like, you're trying to, like, it would make more sense if that was his only chance to use Excalibur and that was it. But you bring it up and then it just gets brought up again, and it just was no point. And it's like he touches the sword, and he doesn't want his father figure to get killed, but he does. And so my whole thing was, and this is to me what ruined like a lot of that, like, I guess, story was, so Professor Vroom gets killed by Nimue, right? He ends up picking up the sword, and then Alice, is a conduit for it, and then she brings back Professor Broom, temporarily, and then he has like another conversation with Hellboy, and then this time Hellboy's like, "Oh yeah, I can choose my own life. I don't have to follow her," and he just chops off her head with Excalibur.
But it's kind of like a repeat of what we saw in the '04 movie. Because remember when when Hellboy is used as the key to like open the door to open that portal, John Myers basically does the same thing that Professor Broom and Alice do in this movie. Really,
sure, yeah. The only difference in what got to me is the fact that why just didn't, to me, what would have made more sense was why not he just take the sword and go after her anyways. It just, I don't know, to me, it felt like an extra step there. So initially when he's talking to his father, he's okay, and he decides, well, I'm not going to do it. and then he pulls up the sword, and then now the second time he talks to him, now it's like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to be the bad guy. I'm my own person. I can do whatever I want. And that to me was just very jarring, because it's like, it almost feels like his death was a waste, because to me, you might as well just take the sword out and then have him have this, heartfelt conversation after the fact, and maybe he would have lived. I don't know. That's just the way that I looked at it. But, he kills Nimue, throws her head into hell or whatever was there. And that's the end of it. So, and I don't know, the 2019, it felt like you just had to understand more about the world, and they just didn't really bring it to you in a way that was very digestible. It was just kind of like they throw everything at you. You got pig demons, and you got fairies, and you got all this stuff going on, and then you got vampires. Now we're gonna bring in Arthur and Merlin myth into this, and it all just kind of felt like they just throw everything at you, and it just didn't really feel very organic. And I think that's why, to me, I think the fact that the world, it just felt so chaotic, it was really hard to get interested in it. And that's why I think for me, the 2004, I enjoyed that kind of story in that world more than I enjoyed it for the 2019. So
yeah, because
I guess, what about you for?
Well, I was going to say, because because for for the average layman, if you watch the 2019 version, you're going to be lost. But if you don't have someone there to kind of just like let you know, hey, this is the backstory, this is where the story is coming from. But I agree with you. They were just trying to do too much, in one movie. What I will also say too is that with the 2004 movie, they basically just took one storyline, and they the Seeds of Destruction, and they sort of followed it, but they were also doing their own thing. Whereas with the 2019 version, they were taking elements of Seed of Destruction, wake the dead, the chain coffin, the Wild Hunt, and they were just putting all these stories into the blender and to create this one movie. But in doing so, you kind of got lost, because it starts off with one story, and then you move into the Osiris Club, we're hunting these giants, and then all of a sudden you go back to the 90s, where Hellboy is trying to save Alice from the fairies, but then you kind of jump to King Arthur, but then you jump to Nimue, and then you jump to Ben Daimio as the Were Jaguar. So you kind of get overwhelmed, even even for someone who's a fan of of the Hellboy universe. It can be a bit overwhelming. And when I was watching that movie again, I was just thinking to myself, maybe they should have just done what Guillermo del Toro did, and just focus on one story, and then save all the other stories for a different movie, or at least for like an animated film. Because in trying to like put all these different stories into one, you kind of lose the forest from the trees, really.
Yeah, I think you alienate that new fan base that's trying to get interested into Hellboy.
And keep in mind too, and I said this already. I mean, when you're making a Hellboy movie, you're making it for a specific niche group. It's not like with the MCU or DC, where anybody can just hop in, right? Hellboy isn't as big of a household name as like Batman or the Avengers, really. But I will say that in terms of pacing, it kind of hits the ground running. You don't really have time to breathe. But what I find really, really annoying was the fact they started off with the King Arthur legend, because they figured, oh well, people don't really know too much about Hellboy, but everybody knows King Arthur, so we'll go with that. But even then, they kind of leave you hanging with the whole Arthur legend until they bring back Merlin. You're like, oh, okay, I sort of know who Merlin is. And again, to go back to my point about Hellboy being made for a niche audience, you wouldn't know that Hellboy, from being half human from his mother's side, is the last descendant of King Arthur, which would thereby make him eligible to be King of England, which would make him worthy to draw Excalibur from the stone. So if you're not familiar with that backstory, when you're watching it, you're just sitting there, you're like, this is all messed up. This makes absolutely no sense. But I mean, but like I said, what's done is done. I feel like I feel like personally, like if they were going to, do a Hellboy reboot, they should have taken a story that that people weren't too familiar with and kind of go with that, but also
Mhm.
don't really follow the same plot as they did with the '04 movie because if you think about it, the '04 movie was basically about a villain trying to help Hellboy tap his quote unquote potential, and then someone has to remind him, hey, you have a choice, you don't have to follow destiny, really. um so on the surface level they may seem like different movies, but deep down they're pretty much following the same plot line. And I feel like they should have gone in an entirely different direction in the 2019 movie rather than just do the same old. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, agreed.
Because
Um,
like at the end I mean, Professor Broom dies in both of these movies, right?
mhm,
And he has a sort of crisis where he can't figure out what he wants to do, and then someone has to help him, figure out, hey, this is who you are. You're not this person. You can make your own decisions.
mhm.
And in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm fairly certain he already knew
Yes,
that he didn't have
yes,
you didn't need to remind him again.
yes.
Like
Both
he can make his
Professor
own
Brooms do
decisions.
that very well.
Although I do like the fact that Ian McShane's version is just telling him, "Hey, just shut up and man up." I mean, you don't
Yes,
need
he was.
to act like a baby.
Yes, he was very. He was definitely obtuse compared to everything. So.
Now I will say this: what I liked about the 2019 version was we got to see a glimpse of the origin story where Hellboy is brought to Earth, right? But in a completely different manner, they bring in Lobster Johnson and the members
Yes.
of the Osiris Club to kind of kick ass, which I thought was quite humorous because in the '04 version, Rasputin kind of gets sucked into that portal and we don't see him again, whereas Thomas Hayden Church's Lobster Johnson's like, when you see the devil, tell him who sent you, and he like brands him with the claw,
Yes. Yes.
which
Yeah.
I
It
thought was pretty
definitely.
funny.
Yeah. It was very. Yeah. It's interesting how like a lot of that plays out the same, but there's clearly the addition of Lobster Johnson, the 2019, that it makes it very unique and memorable compared to the first one. So it definitely felt more comic booky, as opposed to the 2004, which I think was more, kind of drawn out. They spent more time with it. Um, but yeah, there definitely is. I think Hellboy 2019 felt like it just was constantly in the fifth gear, the whole way through. Whereas for at least the 2004 version allowed you to breathe a little bit from time to time. So yeah, I would say like, so looking at the two, right, and we're just making up the numbers right now. I think the total was 3-2 for the Hellboy 2004 version,
Yeah,
and I would agree with that. I think the 2004 version to me was more enjoyable. While maybe it had elements I wasn't a huge fan of, like I think it kind of start off really strong, then got too melodramatic in the middle, and then kind of just went from 0 to 60 really, really quick. And there's just too much going on at the end. It was still kind of a muddled mess, but there was still some elements I enjoyed. I did enjoy the atmosphere of the world. I think that has to be said. Whereas for 2019, I mean, it makes no mistake. Like, you're there, the whole thing is all with these like creatures about. You got witches, pig demon fairy things, like Baba Yaga. Like, it's all there. So like you're just kind of thrust into that world. But I don't think it really gives you an opportunity just to soak in everything. It's just like everything has to be some crazy over the top supernatural thing. And it just felt like it was in overdrive the whole time. So I
well, I'll
definitely
say,
give points to the 2004 version.
well, I'll say this too. I mean, the 2004 version was more PG-13, really, because
That's true.
you really didn't see that many deaths, and when they did happen, it was either off screen or it wasn't. It was very minimal in terms
Yeah.
of blood. Whereas here, it's like the 2019 version, it was very much like someone decided, well, what if we made a slasher movie,
Yeah.
but it was set in the Hellboy universe? Because you get like, because from the very, very beginning, from King Arthur all the way to the Russian lab, people are just getting massacred left, right, and center,
Yeah.
and they're very liberal about how much CGI blood they're spilling, because it's just being sprayed all over the place. It's
Yeah.
like they just can't get enough of that stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean, at the end in the 2019 version, you have like all those giant monsters out, and they're like stepping and skewering people at their feet and like picking them up and ripping them apart. Yeah, that
Yeah.
fire demon that's burning people. So yeah, they absolutely had no problem with using that gore. So yeah, which version stuck out to you, Luca? You got the 2004, the 2009. Hit us with your closing thoughts here.
I mean, I enjoyed the 2004 version just because of the fact that it goes for that, you know, dark gothic horror tone, and you know, in terms of the story, it, you know, yes, the pacing is, you know, is very slow, but it kind of eases you into what the universe is about, and it's, and you know, and as much as we want to like rip on it and say, oh, you know, it's doing all these things, it's adding all these elements, I felt like there was at least some consistency. You at least knew what the story was from beginning to end, right? They're trying, you know, overall they're trying to go after these creatures who are trying to enter our reality and bring about the end of the world. Whereas with the 2019 version, it's like you don't really know. I mean, you don't really know what's going on here, because we know he's after Nimue, but he keeps getting sidetracked by all these different side quests because he's got to help out the Osiris Club in, you know, fighting these giants. But the Osiris Club, they're just as villainous as Nimue because for whatever reason they don't want a demon sitting on the throne of England. And what's also ironic too is the fact that with the 2019 version, you know, this Hellboy isn't really comic accurate, at least in my opinion, because he doesn't have any of that good natured gruff that we're familiar with in Ron Perlman's portrayal. He's more of this angsty, angry guy who could lash out at any time. But oddly enough, the story is trying to be as faithful to the comics as possible, whereas Perlman, he's, you know, he's very much faithful to the comic book portrayal, even if, you know, Guillermo del Toro takes Seeds of Destruction and kind of goes off on a tangent, you know, with the love triangle and all the other stuff. But I also enjoyed the fact that, you know, Guillermo del Toro is very consistent in his vision. I mean, it's what you would expect from a guy who does a lot of, you know, these dark fantasy horror films.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll also say I'm a fan of the effects that they used. I'm a fan of the fact that you know that the way they shot it, it was always dark, and even when it was set in the daytime, they made it a point to make it always dark, just keeping, you know, with the tone of the story. And there was also the sense of timelessness almost, you know what I mean, because you kind of get the sense where it could be in the 50s, it could be in the 90s, or it could be in 2004. You don't really know. Whereas whereas with Hellboy, you kind of know that it's set in 2019, because there are certain buildings that you would see there where it's like, yeah, that's something that was made in the 21st century. And I don't want to keep going on and on, because I definitely want to give you time to say, you know, put your piece in there. But
no, I'm already done. So,
but I will say that, but I will say that I will say that John Hurt, he does bring this sort of dignity to the character of Professor Broom, because you could sort of see him as his fatherly figure, right? You know, yeah, I mean, he is a bit detached. He isn't on screen as much, but you do get the sense that that you could see him more as a father figure than Ian McShane, who, you know, as great of a character, you know, as he is, you kind of get the feeling, you know, he's not afraid to take his belt off and, you know, discipline you if you got out of line. You know what I mean? Which when I was watching it, I was thinking, yeah, he looks like he might have taken his belt off a few times in the past, which would then explain why Hellboy is the way that he is now, because his dad probably did some psychological damage to him when he was a kid. Not that child abuse is funny. I'm just saying that's how he comes off as on screen. So for me, I enjoyed the 04 version. But yeah, let us know down in the comments below what you think. If you enjoyed Hellboy 2004, if you think 2019 was the bomb. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a happy Halloween, and we'll catch you in the next one.